Hello, everyone. Across the United States, legal language that most people usually ignore has suddenly become the center of national attention. Words like custody, compliance, court authority, and enforcement mechanisms are no longer abstract concepts buried in legal textbooks. They are now being openly discussed on cable news, in court filings, and by former prosecutors who know exactly what those words mean when a defendant refuses to cooperate with the judicial system. Donald Trump is not just a former president. He is a criminal defendant in multiple jurisdictions. That single fact changes everything. In the American legal system, no individual is above the authority of the courts. Not a billionaire, not a celebrity, and not a former commander-in-chief. When courts issue lawful orders, those orders are not suggestions. They are binding. And when a defendant repeatedly challenges, delays, or defies those orders, judges have tools to enforce compliance. That is where the conversation about custody begins. Let's be very clear. Custody does not automatically mean handcuffs, jail cells, or dramatic perp walks. Custody, in legal terms, simply means a person is placed under the control of law enforcement or court authority. That control can range from supervised release to detention, depending on circumstances. So why is Trump's name suddenly being mentioned in the same sentence as custody? It starts with the growing number of cases and the increasingly serious tone coming from judges themselves. In several proceedings, judges have warned, on the record, that court orders must be followed. These warnings are not political statements. They are legal signals. When a judge puts language into a transcript about consequences, enforcement, or escalation, it is not for television. It is to establish a clear record. Legal analysts across the spectrum agree on one thing. Courts escalate slowly but deliberately. First come warnings, then fines, then restrictions. Then, if defiance continues, enforcement. This is not unique to Trump. This is how the system works for everyone. The difference is that Trump is the most high-profile defendant the system has ever had to confront. There is also another factor that makes this situation unprecedented: the Secret Service. By law, Trump receives lifetime protection. That means any discussion of custody automatically involves coordination at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. This doesn't block the courts, but it complicates logistics. Former federal officials have explained that if a court ever ordered Trump into custody, it would not look like a normal arrest. There would be no surprise raid. There would be negotiations, planning, and controlled movement involving multiple agencies. But make no mistake, complexity does not equal immunity. Courts have dealt with protected individuals before. They have detained mob bosses, intelligence officials, and foreign leaders under extraordinary circumstances. The legal principle remains the same. What has changed recently, and this is crucial, is the tone. Judges are no longer speaking hypothetically, they are speaking conditionally. Phrases like, "if this conduct continues and the court will consider further action," are not empty words. They are legal thresholds being publicly established. At the same time, prosecutors are becoming more direct. Filings are sharper, language is tighter, patience is thinner. This is what escalation looks like before it becomes visible to the public. Supporters of Trump argue that this is all political, that no former president would ever be taken into custody. Critics respond with a simple question. If not now, then when does the rule of law apply? That question is dividing the country. But inside courtrooms, division doesn't matter. Precedent does. And precedent says that when defendants test the limits of judicial authority, judges eventually respond. Another key issue is compliance with release conditions. In any criminal case, defendants released pending trial must follow specific rules. Violating those rules can result in modified conditions or revocation. This is not punishment, it is procedure. Legal experts emphasize that custody is not about revenge or politics. It is about control of the process. Courts must ensure that trials can proceed without interference, intimidation, or obstruction. That is why even the discussion of custody is extraordinary. It means the system is preparing for worst-case scenarios, not hoping they won't happen. Behind the scenes, law enforcement agencies are reportedly gaming out contingencies. That doesn't mean action is imminent. It means professionals are doing their jobs. And here is the part many people misunderstand. No judge wants to be the first to order a former president into custody. That would be a historic, destabilizing moment. Judges know that. Prosecutors know that, which is exactly why the warnings are being issued so clearly and so carefully. The message is simple. Comply or the court will enforce. Whether Trump ultimately crosses that line remains to be seen. But the line is now visible. It has been drawn in legal ink, not media speculation. This is why headlines feel more serious. This is why language has shifted. This is why even Trump's own legal team is increasingly cautious in public statements. They know what escalation looks like. They know what happens next if warnings are ignored. And they know that once a court decides enforcement is necessary, the process moves fast. America has never been here before. A former president running for office while facing the real possibility, however remote, of court-ordered custody. That reality alone tells you how high the stakes are. This story is not about drama. It is about the collision between political power and legal authority, and history shows that when those two collide, the courts eventually decide the outcome. Stay with this story. The next developments will not come from rallies or social media posts. They will come from courtrooms, filings, and rulings, and when they do, the consequences will be very real. Courts are reactive institutions. They do not chase headlines. They respond to actions placed in front of them through filings, testimony, and conduct. Every motion, every public statement referenced in court, every alleged violation is evaluated not by emotion, but by record. Right now, that record is growing. One of the most important things to understand is that custody is never the first option. It is the last safeguard. Judges prefer voluntary compliance because it preserves stability and legitimacy. But when voluntary compliance appears uncertain, courts begin preparing alternatives. That preparation is happening quietly. Former prosecutors have explained that when judges start laying out consequences in advance, it is because they want to avoid surprises. The law values predictability. Defendants must know exactly what could happen if they cross a line. This is why warnings are issued publicly and clearly. No ambiguity. No confusion. Another major factor is timing. These cases are not happening in isolation. They are moving forward while the country is heading into a high-stakes election cycle. That puts extraordinary pressure on the justice system to appear fair, careful, and restrained. But restraint does not mean paralysis. Judges are aware that delaying enforcement too long creates its own risks. If courts appear unwilling to act, it can undermine authority not just in one case, but across the system. That balance between caution and credibility is where the tension lies. Trump's legal strategy has always relied heavily on delay, appeal, and public pressure. That strategy has worked in civil cases and political battles. Criminal courtrooms operate differently. Judges cannot factor in crowd size, polling numbers, or fundraising totals. They can only factor in compliance and law. That is why legal analysts say this moment feels different. The conversation is no longer about whether Trump can delay proceedings. It is about whether the court believes it still has full control over the process. If a judge concludes that control is slipping, the response is procedural, not emotional. Restrictions tighten. Conditions change. Oversight increases. Custody becomes one option among several, not because of who the defendant is, but because of what the court needs to function. There is also the matter of precedent for future cases. Judges are deeply aware that whatever they do here will be studied for decades. Every decision sets a standard. That is why no move will be sudden. If custody were ever ordered, it would come after a documented trail of warnings, findings, and judicial reasoning. The court would want the record to be unassailable. Supporters who believe this could never happen point to history. Critics respond that history has never tested the system like this before. Both are right. The United States has never prosecuted a former president at this scale. That means there is no roadmap, only principles. And one of those principles is equal application of the law. Another is preservation of democratic stability. Those principles sometimes pull in opposite directions. Inside courtrooms, judges are trying to reconcile them in real time. Outside courtrooms, the public often sees only fragments, a headline, a quote, a warning. What they don't see is the meticulous process unfolding behind the scenes. Judges are weighing not just legal options, but consequences. They are asking, will this ensure compliance? Will this protect the integrity of the trial? Will this prevent escalation? Custody is not a goal. It is a tool. And like any powerful tool, it is used sparingly. For now, the message from the courts is unmistakable. The rules apply, the warnings are real, and patience is not unlimited. Trump remains free. He remains a candidate. He remains protected by law, but he is also subject to it. That dual reality is what makes this moment so volatile. The coming weeks will matter more than the coming headlines. Compliance will matter more than rhetoric. Court filings will matter more than campaign speeches, because ultimately it is not voters or commentators who decide custody. It is judges, and judges speak through orders, not outrage. As this story continues, one thing is certain. The legal system is moving forward step by step, with its eyes wide open. What happens next will depend on whether those steps are respected or resisted. And that decision rests with one man. There is another layer to this that rarely gets discussed publicly, but inside legal circles, it is impossible to ignore: legitimacy. Courts do not just enforce laws. They protect the public's trust in the rule of law. When a defendant openly challenges judicial authority, judges have to consider not only the individual case, but the signal sent to every other defendant watching. If a court appears hesitant because a defendant is powerful, wealthy, or politically influential, that hesitation can weaken confidence across the system. Judges know this. They are trained to think institutionally, not personally. That is why this situation is being handled with extreme care and extreme documentation. Every warning is on the record. Every instruction is precise. Every boundary is clearly marked. This is not accidental. It is preparation. Another critical point is enforcement discretion. Courts do not operate alone. They rely on marshals, law enforcement agencies, and compliance officers. All of those actors are bound by lawful court orders. If an order is issued, it is not optional for them either. That reality changes the calculus dramatically. Once a judge signs an order, the question is no longer political feasibility. It becomes legal obligation. This is why so many former officials have stressed that if custody were ever ordered, it would happen calmly, professionally, and without spectacle. The system is designed to avoid chaos, not create it. And yet the very possibility of custody has already had an impact. Legal behavior has shifted. Public statements have been more cautious. Lawyers are choosing words more carefully. That is how deterrence works in practice. The mere presence of enforcement authority influences conduct. Still, the risk remains. The closer these cases move toward trial, the higher the stakes become. Trial is the point where control matters most. Evidence must be protected. Jurors must be shielded. Proceedings must remain orderly. Any perception that a defendant is undermining those foundations triggers a response. That response does not have to be dramatic. It can be incremental. More restrictions on speech, more supervision, more conditions. Each step is designed to maintain control without crossing unnecessary lines. But every step also narrows the space for error. This is why legal experts keep emphasizing that custody is not a prediction. It is a contingency, a last resort that exists precisely so the court never loses leverage. Trump's supporters see strength in defiance. Courts see risk. Those two perspectives cannot coexist indefinitely. At some point, one yields to the other. What makes this moment historic is not the personalities involved, but the test itself. Can the American legal system enforce its authority against someone who once commanded the executive branch? That question has never been answered in real time before. So far, the system has chosen patience. But patience is not passivity. Every filing, every ruling, every warning is part of a measured progression, and progressions by definition move forward. No one knows exactly how this ends. Anyone who claims certainty is guessing. What we do know is how the system works when pushed. It documents, it warns, it escalates, not out of anger, not out of politics, but out of necessity. This is not about punishment before trial. It is about ensuring that the trial can happen at all. That distinction matters. As long as compliance holds, escalation can pause. If it breaks, the system responds. That is the reality facing the country right now. A former president, a criminal defendant, a legal system under the microscope, and a simple truth at the center of it all: the law does not negotiate forever. What comes next will be shaped not by speeches or slogans, but by choices made under oath and under order. And those choices will echo far beyond one case, one campaign, or one moment in history. As this chapter moves toward its next phase, the tension you're feeling is the same tension inside the justice system itself. On one side is restraint, the understanding that every action taken against a former president will be scrutinized, challenged, and remembered. On the other side is responsibility, the obligation to enforce the law evenly, regardless of status. That balance is fragile. Judges are not blind to the political climate, but they are also not permitted to factor fear into their rulings. The oath they take is not to public comfort, but to the Constitution and the law. That is why the final outcome will not hinge on outrage or applause. It will hinge on findings, on evidence, on compliance. And this is where the story reaches its most important truth.